a conductive wire, and you were so electric. I had no say when you came so near, and just passed right through me.
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is Back, as is Tim Matthews. We're talking all about the 1997 movie LA Confidential today. It's one that I was a little worried about watching simply because of Kevin Spacey's presence in it. So Tim, I think it's safe to say that looking back on some of his performances now, you kind of cringe a little when you see him. Did you feel that way when you were rewatching this?
Definitely. I mean, it's highly complicated issue and discussion with all the stuff happening with different, actors and writers and everything. The basic thing that I found is it's kind of a case by case basis on what bothers me, and typically what bothers me is when certain situations or facets of a project kind of lean a little close to what said person was accused of. And I don't know if you felt this, and I've seen this movie a number of times years ago. This was a recent rewatch for me. It's been a while. I had forgotten how much of this he actually was in. Like when we started talking about doing this podcast, I had it in my head. I'm like, oh well, and even I recommended it to a friend of mine recently, and I'm like, don't worry. I'm like, Kevin Spacey's barely in it. I was like, it's mostly the other guys. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching this, and I'm like, oh man, he is in a lot of this. And some of the stuff, I don't know if it was me projecting but I got some vibes from his character that I was like, I feel like his character could have been guilty of some of the stuff that Kevin Spacey was of. Like, I don't know. It's seedy Hollywood, and his character is quite seedy, and definitely rides the line of morale. I mean, it's a noir, so everybody does,
and it's the 50s.
Yeah. But it's still, there were definite instances that I was more uncomfortable than I thought I was going to be with this movie. I thought it was going to be more of a throwaway Kevin Spacey role where I could look at it objectively and be like, oh, well, I mean, he put on a good performance. He's a good actor, and not really worry about, any of the content. But I was proven wrong, and that's what I get for suggesting a movie that I haven't seen in a while.
Well, it's one of those movies that I had always wanted to watch because I actually have the James Ellroy book that it's based off of. I just haven't gotten around to reading it. I know I had this big dream of getting the book read before we did this podcast, but that did not happen. So it was something that I had always heard good things about. And so I was worried going into this that because of this one person being in it, I automatically would not like it. And that happened to not be the case because I really did love this movie. And I wanted to bring up Kevin Spacey first, just to sort of put that out there that we know he is very problematic. But I think because of how long ago this movie came out and the fact that at that time, at least, it seemed like nobody really knew about anything that had recently come to light. At least the public didn't know about it. And there are a lot of other people to focus on in this movie. And also, spoiler, Kevin Spacey's character dies. So there's that at least. You can rejoice over that a little, I guess.
The one thing I'll say is what everybody can handle in a performance of a problematic actor, or whatever involvement of a film. What everyone can handle, it varies. So, I certainly understand if someone says, oh, he's in it, I don't want to watch it. I mean, that's certainly up to you.
Yeah.
But if you're able to just kind of push past it, and if you are able to just kind of watch the film and appreciate the film itself, especially everybody else involved, I think you'll really enjoy yourself. I think it's a fantastic, and still is, even after it. Beforehand, I loved it, and I still love it now. I think it's a fantastic addition to the history of noir films. I certainly put it in my top 10 of noir films. I think it hits all the beats that I need it to, and it features so much incredible style in the cinematography. It has that classic narration. It's got a terrific performance by, I mean, you've got Danny DeVito, you've got Russell Crowe, you've got Guy Pearce, you've got Kim Basinger. Like, it's just, beat for beat. It gives you everything you want in a. And I know I'm forgetting other actors to mention. I mean, there's so many great people in this, but it's beat for beat. Just, it's what you want in a noir. I mean, I think even at times, and maybe it's just watching it now and it being kind of a more of the modern era of noir films. It's like some of the stuff almost, I think, risks kind of feeling like parody, like even like the narration, especially of Danny DeVito. Like, it just feels so stylized that it's almost hard to take it kind of seriously. But at the same time, because of the sheer style that they just full on go for it, like from the second this film starts, like I am in, and I'm ready to dive down the whatever mystery that they're going to tell me, and I'm like giddy. And then I'm disgusted, and then I'm angry, and then I'm excited. Like, it's just, it's got all the feelings I need. And obviously, or at least hopefully, if people are listening to this, you have seen the film. But if you hadn't, I do highly recommend it. If you're a fan of noir or just a fan of that old Hollywood style that they capture in film, you're going to get everything you want out of this.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up some of the other cast members there, and James Cromwell's another big one because he has had such an illustrious career.
That will do, pig.
Even at that point in time. And you have some character actors who show up, like Paul Guilfoyle as Mickey Cohen, Simon Baker as Matt Reynolds, and these are faces that I wouldn't have recognized at the time. Also, at the time, I was like 5 when this came out, so there's no way I was going to be watching it.
You didn't see this in theaters? That's weird.
No,
your parents didn't take you to see
so.
LA Confidential? Come on.
So it's always interesting for me looking back, being like, oh, hey, these familiar faces were in this movie that I've been wanting to watch for so long. And, maybe they weren't as big at the time, or they hadn't been in the roles that I know them from, but it's still fun to get to see them playing these bit parts in a movie like this. And Kevin Spacey aside, this movie has a lot going for it, even though it's massively a boys' club, because that's just how the police force was in the 50s. So you can't really fault the movie for accurately depicting the era that it takes place in. And Kim Basinger really stands out because of the fact that it's such a boys' club. Her performance is one that you wouldn't necessarily expect given the character that she plays, but she plays such a crucial role at the same time. And you mentioned, being angry, being excited. And I think what they do best with this is they take these cast members and they shove them in all different directions just to have to get these two completely opposite guys to come together in the end. Save the day, essentially. So you have a lot of conflicting personalities. You can tell that, Guy Pearce's character, Detective Lieutenant Ed Exley, is someone who wants to play things as straight as possible because of what happened to his father. He wants justice, and he quickly finds out that corruption is just running rampant through the LAPD, and he does what he can to stop that, even though he does some things that maybe he doesn't necessarily fully agree with along the way. And you just see all of this come together with this cast and how it all plays out in the end. And you're like, okay, yeah, these two guys, by the end of it, they're the two you're rooting for. And, sadly, Danny DeVito's Sid does not make it to the end of the movie either. But Danny DeVito is just one of those personalities where you can't ignore his character no matter who he's playing.
Yeah.
And I think he did a great job with that with Sid, between, like you said earlier, the narration and just his actual on-screen appearances.
Yeah, he fit that role so well. Like, I feel like when he's like closing out he's typing and he's like, and very hush hush. Like I feel like it could play so corny, and the fact is that it does, but it plays corny because of it. It's the way he intentionally says it. Like it's that he knows how tongue in cheek he's being. It's his style. It's his writing, and you even see like when he's getting all excited with Kevin Spacey's character, like he's like, oh, you got a new bust for me. Like you just know, like he's just jumping at the fact that for the next time that he gets to type up just that real gossipy and dirty column. Like he's just like, ooh, don't worry. It's like or don't, you know. I'm losing my train of thought because it's just I'm like picturing him now, and I'm just I'm laughing at him because I'm picturing him in this role, but then a little bit of like Always Sunny started pulling into my head, because he is that Danny DeVito personality. Even though it feels so him, it just suits that role so well. So I was able to get roped into it rather than just being distracted by it being Danny DeVito, because sometimes that is the case with certain big personality actors, that after so long, sometimes it's hard to not see, oh, that's Johnny Depp playing a role. Oh, that's, so and so playing a role. But so like he's fantastic, and then like you mentioned Guy Pearce, that he's this character who, wants to toe the line. He wants to do things the right way, and it's funny because the way the film starts, he's clearly, he's the good guy in terms of people that we've been introduced to. But my first reaction sitting and watching, and granted, it's like I've watched it before, but still, and I know what's to come and I know what's going to happen, but I still kind of hate him in those first scenes. Like I'm just like, You're annoying. Like nobody likes you. I don't like you. Why are you being a jerk? And but it's like when you're sitting here, just like, no, like he's not a dirty cop. Like I should be rooting for this guy, but still, it's like I'm sitting there and I'm like, no, you ratted out what's supposed to be your friends, your coworkers. You're a jerk. I hate you. And then it's like so it's these complicated feelings that this movie makes you feel, that it's like it has me rooting against who's supposed to be the hero.
Right.
And it knows that it wants me to root against who's supposed to be the hero. It knows it wants me to side with Russell Crowe. It wants me to side with Kevin Spacey and these people that are messing with it. It's when James Cromwell's like great speech when he's like, don't be a detective. He's like, no, I'm going to be a detective. He's like, if you had to plant a gun for a person you knew was guilty, would you do it? And he's like, no. And I'm just like, no, you would. I'm just like,
yeah, because you want to believe that these cops are being slightly corrupt for the overall good. If they know someone is guilty, they want that person put away. But as the story goes on, and, with this movie being over 2 hours, I was a little worried about the story because I hadn't read the book, so I wasn't familiar with what it was going to be like. And I was like, okay, I know it's about cops and, the LAPD, but can they really drag this out for over 2 hours? And sometimes I think for me, it's a detriment to watch things at home because I'll like pause something and go make dinner for 20, 30 minutes. And then it just feels like the movie's a lot longer than it is.
Yeah.
And with this, I was a little worried about that. But by the time things got going and you hit that third act, I was so invested in what was going on, and I was rooting for Ed to be right about everything because
same
story-wise, they have Ed and Bud, who personality-wise are complete opposites, but, Bud is just an officer, which I thought was weird because he was always in a suit like a detective. Officers don't wear suits, so that was one thing I was just kind of like, okay, well, we'll let it slide for now because it's the 50s LAPD, so I'm guessing they just did whatever they wanted.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know what the rules were back then. Like, yeah. It's maybe if you were kind of almost a detective, you got to wear a suit. I don't know. Maybe he just punched the guy who told him that he had to wear a uniform, and then he was like, all right, cool, you can wear a suit.
And
whatever.
Clearly they didn't play by the rules anyway, so it didn't really matter at that point. And it was one of those things where Bud knew he wasn't the smartest guy in the room and that he was mostly being used as the muscle.
Absolutely.
But as the story goes on, him and Ed start to figure things out at roughly the same pace. And you have Dudley Smith, James Cromwell's character who's in charge, and he's just throwing a wrench in everything by getting Sid to go take photos of Ed with, the high-class prostitute, if you will, played by Kim Basinger as, she's playing Lynn, who is dating Bud, like for real dating him. He's not paying her to date him like the rest of the men. And
always a confusing line with the hookers in movies.
Yeah, you're like, okay, all right. But I think in this, they made it pretty clear that was what was happening. She was letting him in ways that she didn't let her Johns in. And
it was a great balance, the way that they're back and forth in their conversation of him like, I'd like to see you again, and her just being like, as a date, or it's like that,
or by appointment.
Yeah, exactly. Like it was that great discussion that you're just kind of like, this is such a weird conversation, but I'm so enthralled and I want you two to be together.
Yeah, so when Sid takes the pictures of her with Ed, she thinks she is helping Bud, and it just leads to this massive fight at the police station between Ed and Bud, and that is sort of the catalyst for these two characters coming together, and the fact that what Ed is saying lines up with what Bud was finding out. And at one point, Bud was actually a few steps ahead of Ed, which I thought was a nice little turn of events, because Ed is the smart guy, and he is sort of the one going to the police chief or whoever it was and the DA and being like, this is what you should do because this will, get you the outcome you want. But because Dudley Smith is corrupt and behind everything, he knows exactly what Ed is going to do.
Yeah.
So you have these two people coming together because I think Bud is a lot less predictable than Ed in this, and that gives them a slight advantage when the big fight goes down and everything. And just the fact that they both come out of it by the end of the story, I think was so relieving, because they do let you believe that Bud is dead. He gets shot in the face. I mean,
and I like it was funny because I've seen this before, and granted it's been a while, but still, like, I was sitting there and I'm just like, oh, he's dead. I was like, I don't remember him dying. I was like, what the hell? I was like, why don't I remember him dying? Clearly I don't remember him dying because he doesn't die. But that whole 10 minutes, I'm just like, damn. I'm like he died. I'm like, this sucks. And I was like, he was turning over a new leaf, kind of, but not really. I mean, as much as he could. I mean, that's why he was able to be a little ahead of Ed from time to time, because Ed would play so by the rules, whereas Bud knew sometimes you follow your hunch and you keep it close to the vest. And it's like you follow your hunches and you just kind of figure it out on your own. And Bud knew, even though Bud doesn't know who's corrupt, Bud knows, all right, this is the type of thing I keep to myself until I figure out why, until I figure out the next step, until I figure out the next move. I don't tell anybody, because it doesn't matter. He knows that it doesn't matter whether he respects somebody in the department. He knows they're all dirty. He knows they're all dirty in some way. He just doesn't know how much. And to the level that James Cromwell's character, the captain, to his level of dirty, I don't think any of them expected. But I think at least Bud always knew, like, there's some lines that he's crossing, but I think he just assumed it was the same similar lines that Bud would cross, but not go to this next level. And I think that's where Bud turns around and becomes more in line with Ed's thinking, because he's like, oh, there is a line. Like, yeah, I'm willing to be a little hazy, to be a little gray on this stuff, but there is a line, and this has gone too far. Of course, after punching him in the face.
Yeah, and this movie really stands up too.
Mm-hmm.
maybe not necessarily story-wise because things have progressed so much since the 50s. There are moments where just you're kind of cringing at what went on in the 50s, and that's not a downside to the movie necessarily because you want it to be accurate.
Right.
You know, if it were the 50s and they were, you know, going on about equal rights and how people are starting to have more of them, you'd be like, no, inaccurate. That's not what happened in the 50s necessarily.
Yeah.
Sure, people wanted equal rights, but they weren't remotely close to getting them from what we see in the LAPD. You know, it's all white dudes.
Yeah, there's a level of like wiggle room that you can have where it's like of course, you know, I'm trying to think of what. Oh, you know what? It was. I don't remember what season of Stranger Things it was, but the example that I recall from it is what's her name? The main girl that dates Jonathan.
Nancy.
Nancy. She and her mom have like a conversation kind of about like women's rights and wanting more. And it's this private conversation that it's just kind of like talking about the realism of the world, but of course I want more for you. And I feel like that's a great example of what you can do with the wiggle room. It's like you can interject this great conversation that can spark discussion while still remaining within the era. And a movie like this, it has to remain within the era, regardless of how uncomfortable it is. And if you have some discussions about where the level of respect is, then you need to stand true to that. Because if you don't, then it starts to feel out of place. Now, granted, neither of us lived in the 50s, so I don't know what level of conversation or discussion that was being had. But everything that we've been led to believe from what we understand is that it wasn't had that often. And the police department was definitely a boys' club for a very long time. Even after this, you know, it's so it's there's things in this film that do make you feel uncomfortable, but I also feel like that's a part of noir. Like noir is all about those gray areas. You know, very seldom does a noir end completely happy. You know, even this film, this film, it's the happiest part of the ending of this movie is that Bud
doesn't die.
Is that Bud doesn't die. He and Lynn are seemingly like still together, you know, and who knows how long that will go. But at least at this time, they seem happy. But it's still the bad guys still kind of win. Like
there's so much damage done by the end of it to where you're like, oh, okay, finally it's over. But it's not fantastic necessarily.
Yeah. You're just kind of like, you finish the movie and you're like, all right. And then you're like, oh, wait, well, that kind of sucks. Like the bad guys don't get their due. I mean, they do in the way that they're dead, but that's it. The only people who have that personal sense of justice is Bud and why do I keep forgetting his name?
Ed.
It's such a simple name. Bud and Ed. The only ones who get that semblance of we know what happened and we know that they're done, that they're out. Like they get their own personal satisfaction, but they also know that the game is bigger than them and that there's no way that the proper justice is going to be handed down. It's a cover up. I mean, it's it's in the title. It's confidential. That's it. It's done. It's like, cool. You put a stop to it. They're dead. That was a bad thing, but we can't let the press know this. So what do we need to do here? And Ed kind of sells his soul a little bit. You know, he takes another promotion. It's from the start of it, and it's kind of the part of it that makes you hate him a little bit, is that he was willing to turn on his fellow officers so that it would get him the promotion that he wanted quicker than he was willing to put in the work for. He was like, this is the fast track. This is what I want to do. And in his mind, he's like, this is the right thing. So this is what I'm going to do. In his mind, it's the right thing. He doesn't see the other side of it. Not saying that covering up for dirty officers is the right side of it. But in that time frame, And in that department, that was part of it. It was you stand up for your fellow officer. You stand up for your department regardless of what you think. You don't snitch.
He cheated his way into the promotion basically by strong-arming everyone involved, you know.
And then he does the same thing at the end. So what does he learn? Like
yeah, and the police chief knew that they needed more men like Ed. So it seemed like there was always this notion of, hey, we know these things are going on, but we let them slide because they get results in the end. You know, like planning the gun, which Bud does even after, you know, the initial getting in trouble instance.
What an uncomfortable sequence. That was one that unfortunately rings, I feel, a little modern. That one was tough.
Yeah, and it's like you understand why he did it, but it's still one of those like cringeworthy moments because he sees the girl in the bed in the state that she's in, and he's like, okay, you know, this dude's here, he's responsible. Let me get rid of him. Yeah. Even though he's like eating cereal or whatever he's eating, oatmeal or something.
Yeah, it's not like he was a good guy. Like he probably deserved to go. I mean, he was definitely involved in the rape.
Yeah.
And even like her discussion when Ed realizes that
she lied.
She lied. Like he was like, "What?" And she was like, "I'm a Mexican and these people raped me. Do you think that anyone would care unless they killed these white officers?" And it's like, that's a huge moment for Ed to hear that. And then he has no choice but to go along with it. Like he can't turn to those reporters and then say like, oh, no, hold on, I need to re-review all this. It's like, no, this is it. And he also knows that, all right, like she did get some semblance of justice and they weren't good people. They had to go. They just didn't go for the same reason that he thought. And now here's these people that got away with a crime. And for him, that all translates back to his father, this guy who got away with a crime. And I have a question for you. And
okay.
I'm fuzzy on whether or not this is intentional or maybe it's confirmed and I just kind of like missed it. And I wanted to Google it a bit before our podcast, but I didn't get a chance. But do you think that James Cromwell's character is in fact the person that killed Ed's father? Or do you think that he is that was just him continuing the metaphor that he's like, you are this guy. You are the guy that gets away with it. Or do you actually think he was the guy who got away with it and killed his father? Because I never thought about that until this viewing. And now I'm still sitting on it. And I'm just kind of like, maybe, like, what if his father came across something he wasn't supposed to?
I had that same exact thought because, you know, he gives the man this name, Rollo Tomasi, and those are Jack's dying words.
Yeah.
And Dudley has no idea what Jack is talking about, so he asks Ed, thinking that maybe Jack had mentioned something to him. And you see the look on Ed's face when he has to pause and say, no, he never mentioned someone by that name, because he knows it's Jack getting him a message from beyond the grave at this point.
Yeah.
And you get this moment where you're kind of like, oh man, he killed Jack, who was a very well-known cop. You know, he was the Hollywood boy because he was consulting on this TV show called Badge of Honor, and he had this sort of public presence that not a lot of cops had. So to get rid of someone of that status in the way that Dudley Smith did, you're like, okay, it's very plausible that he could have killed Ed's father.
Yeah.
And he's old enough to have been around when Ed's father was on the force. You know, there's no question in my mind that they know each other or knew each other.
Yeah, I think it's clear like they worked together. Like he knew, because he knew his father, and he was like, at least that was the impression I got, that he knew his father, because he was like, I want to be a detective like my dad. And he's like, you're not your dad. Like, you can't do this.
And if he didn't do it directly himself, I think he knows who did it. if it wasn't him.
I feel like, yeah, even if he didn't pull the trigger, I feel like whatever he's been involved in and the corruption he's been involved in has been going on for a lot longer than this film allows us to know.
Yeah.
And I don't exactly remember when his father died. I think it was when he was a kid or something, but it definitely, that was the impression I got. And even if that's one of those things that's just kind of left up in the air for the audience to determine, which frankly, I love when noir does that. I love when it leaves you with the questions. Frankly, in the example of The Big Sleep, there is nothing but questions because that plot makes zero sense, but it's still one of the greatest noirs ever made. And everyone agrees with that. Everyone's just like, yeah, no, I don't know what happened in the plot. Even the director famously asked the writer of the book, he's said, did this character do this? And he's like, well, I don't know. He's like, that's for you to find out. Like, it's just like, what? It's I don't understand. Like, but it doesn't matter because you're just roped into the story. And that's the great thing that I love about noir is that there's all these minute little details and you can pick out something like this situation and where we can spend, 5-10 minutes talking about did he kill his father and have no idea and have no reference or no confirmation. And I'm still very much okay with just being like, no, at least in my head canon, if it's not confirmed in my head canon, I think he did. And I think that adds something really spectacular to that dynamic. And first of all, really difficult for me to watch him in such an evil role after Babe. Like that's like it, and I know he's played so many characters over the years, and I know I've seen him as bad people before, but still, there's just something very inherently evil about this character. Part of me kind of thought, even, and again, having seen this movie before, I'm still sitting there and being like, oh, is he going to do this? I should know, but I'm still questioning it because I'm wrapped up in the movie. When he shoots him, the captain in the back, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, is he going to plant the gun? Like, is that going to be the full circle of like, would you make that tough decision? And I thought he was going to do it, but he just can't. And then he just puts his arms up. And frankly, I'm surprised he survived out of that scene to make it into an interrogation, but he did. And that's a fantastic scene. I love when he just knows what they're talking about behind the mirror.
Yeah. He gets that smile on his face and you're like, man, he really is the smartest guy in the room sometimes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's so good. And my head's like spinning because it's a noir and because of all the moving pieces in this film. I'm just trying to think. I'm like, what have we missed? Like, I'm sure anybody listening to this who's watched the film is going to be able to call out something we've missed. But this really, it's a very full movie. It's a full meal of a movie. You get you get all the main courses, you get all the appetizers, like everything just comes together. And then you get that bit of really, really bittersweet dessert at the end.
Yeah. Another thing I did like story-wise was when they have Jack going to a different department. He was helping out with Vice, but then he was sent to narcotics or vice versa. I forget which it was. But either way, you have these two guys working on these two different cases. You have homicide over here. You have, Vice and narcotics kind of working the drug angle, the gang angle, and these two things are connected, but because the departments aren't really talking to each other until Ed teams up with Jack, they don't know it. And then as Ed and Jack go around, they're like, you know what? I think these two things are connected, and it just shows you how vast the criminal empire is in LA at this time with the mobsters and, in particular, Mickey Cohen doing his thing and the cops being in on it. And then you have a character who we haven't even mentioned yet in Pratchett, I believe it was. And he's sort of just this super rich guy who basically runs the Madams, who he has basically cut to look like superstars, movie actresses and things like that. So, you see a woman with him early on who has her nose all wrapped up, and Bud thinks that she's been abused. Yeah. But really, she just went and got plastic surgery to make her look like some, famous actress. So you have this character who is involved in prostitution and has a bunch of money, so he's getting away with stuff. And then you have, Mickey Cohen's drugs ending up with the cops, and all of these things are intertwining in such a way to where you're like, wow, is LA really that big of a city? Because they make it seem so small sometimes.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. Like it feels like how could all these things be connected? It's like how exactly it kind of feels that small town aspect. And that scene when he sees her in the car and she's all bandaged up, like it's just this great, like he's off duty, like clearly, like they're just there like picking up liquor, but he can't let go of that instinct. And they make fun of him when they show up late to the party with the liquor. He's like, "Oh, sorry, we were late." Bud was helping a damsel in distress, and they're just like, "Oh, they're off with his priorities again." Like it's And that I was trying to look up that actor who plays the head of the prostitute ring. His name is David.
It's either Strathern or Strathairn. I'm not sure, but he's been in a ton of stuff.
Oh yeah, and it's funny to me because I'm just like, he's played quite you could say heroic roles like Edward R. Murrow, and here he is, just being a really like seedy evil kind of a character. He's one of those guys. He's definitely a that guy for me. Because, for instance, I could never remember his name. So that is the definition of that guy. But he's always able to infiltrate these tiny roles, and big roles as well. But it's just he's able to captivate the screen. When I sit and I listen to him talk, there's just a way that the words come out that I'm completely enthralled. So like the scenes where like Bud is just like, where Bud's talking to him, and they have this quintessential back and forth when he's like, it's about this, and I could take you downtown if you'd like to make this official. And his immediate response is just like, oh, so you're saying this is official? Like it's just like it's just like clap back, and it's like, of course it's a script. So but in the moment, I'm just like, oh, I'm like, what are you going to come back with? Like that was, he's electric in all the scenes that he has. And this movie's filled with people like that.
Right. I think I had seen him most recently when I finally watched The Sopranos, and he was only in 3 episodes, but I remember him being in it. And I think that says a lot about him as an actor, because 3 episodes of The Sopranos is next to nothing. There were like 80 some odd episodes of that show. So the fact that he has that sort of impact is just amazing. And, I mentioned some of the other characters like Paul Guilfoyle, who plays Mickey Cohen, and you don't even really need to interact with him that much to be like, oh, he's that dude. And I think they just did such a nice job with getting those bit characters nailed down so well.
I completely agree. Yeah. That's what I think helps this movie just continue to hold up so well on for me, like rewatches, is that it feels full. Like the world feels full. The world feels like it's moving because each of these characters have that real sense to them, that I feel like there's a background to each of these characters, even the tiniest of roles, like the one male. And I believe I understood this correctly. Like he's a male prostitute in the ring. The vibe I got from him was that he was made up to look like James Dean. I could have had that wrong. But then
I can see that.
Yeah. But then he gets his like throat slashed, that's terrible. But but a lot of people die in this movie. But even just that brief moment with him, and it's like, he doesn't necessarily need to give me that much, but when he they send him off to go talk to someone, and then then Jack and Danny DeVito's character just have this brief discussion of just like, oh yeah, no, they're never going to put him in a role after such and such, after he was a hush hush, guy. So it's like they just have these little moments of handing out this background that I'm like, oh man, like so much shit has gone down with a lot of these characters. So it's like, while the LA can sometimes almost feel small because of everything that pieces together, each character that we're introduced to, I don't feel like is just this throwaway character. I'm like, oh no, they're just this bigger connection to this absolutely just horrible old Hollywood world that they're all living in. That it's just like there's corruption everywhere. There's betrayal, there's hatred, there's lust. Like there's everything that comes together. And so that's why I really get this full experience out of watching this movie, even if I'm just like, you're satisfied without having the like good feeling of satisfied, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And especially since everything we discussed at the top of the episode with Kevin Spacey, it's one of those things where you're like, this is a good movie, despite him being in it. And I want to talk about ratings real quick here, because it was very hard for me to give this a high rating knowing that he's in it. So I tried to look at it from the perspective of 1997 and what this movie accomplished in that time period. And I think I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5, maybe a 4.5 out of 5. It's pretty sad that I wanted to talk about ratings and I don't even know what I rated it now. But it's a top tier movie.
Yeah, I haven't rated it yet myself. I really shouldn't. Actually, you reminded me that I did not put it in my letterbox. Crap, I'm going to have to backtrack that.
Mine was 4.5 out of 5, just so we clear that up now.
Perfect. Honestly, I think I'm right there. I'm right there with you. This movie just continues to hold up for me. The music, the style, the performances, the writing, everything is just on point for me. It's terrible and it's unfortunate of the human being that he is. But if I'm going to rate a movie on its merits of everything at that time, I can't take it down for
something that happened after the fact or came out after the fact.
After the fact. Yeah, it's like I can't hurt a rating of the movie for that. I mean, and like I said at the top of the episode, it's, do I support or like him? No, of course not. Do I say that it's wrong to not watch something with him? It's entirely up to your own perspective and what you want to do. I mean, certainly there's I probably don't know. I don't know that I would watch American Beauty again. That's a tougher watch given the situation, but I don't know. It's hard because it's like, do you punish the other performers that put so much into it?
That's something that I've always
it's a struggle
been struggling with lately, because I'm like, okay, there's this thing that I've wanted to see for a very long time. Am I going to let one person's actions ruin that? And because of how many people have done horrible things in Hollywood, it's like, okay, back in the 20s and 30s even, everyone kind of knew about the casting couch. And it's like, do we not watch anything from that time period because of what may have happened that we don't know about? It's very hard to look back at something and be like, well, this is how things are today, so we should just ignore this part of history because people sucked. And if that were the case, well, they probably wouldn't teach history in schools because most of history seems to suck.
Yeah, there's a lot of art that would need to be erased if we just ignored everything from every horrible person.
Right.
I think it's just a case by case basis for every individual on what you want to put your energy into.
It's totally fine to not want to watch things with certain people in it. We're not saying you shouldn't do that. It's just one of those things where on a large scale, that's something that I think would be very hard to do, especially given, how many people from like the 20s and 30s are long gone now. Yeah. It's like, all right, they're not doing anything in 2019 at all because they'd be like 182. So
I mean, to mention another, incredible noir that, I tweeted out that as we were leading up to this episode, I've just become like, I've always enjoyed Turner Classic Movies, and especially like I sit and when I'm hanging out with my grandpa, like that's what we'll do. We will just turn on Turner Classic Movies, and it doesn't matter what's on it. We'll just sit and we'll watch it. A lot of it's Westerns, and that's his favorite stuff, and it's great. But over the time and going to the Fathom events, like I've just gotten even more roped into it, and I've since learned that every Saturday they apparently have Noir Alley. So and even at that they have guest programmers, and recently they had Edward Norton because he was promoting Motherless Brooklyn, which I still want to see. Unfortunately, it's not doing great in the box office, so which is very unfortunate for just non-large special effects films. But then again, Dr. Sleep is struggling too, and that I thought that movie was great. The box office is a weird place right now, but that's a whole other discussion. But anyway, Edward Norton, this is like a whole other episode. But Edward Norton was a guest programmer, and one of the ones he picked was Chinatown. I mean, that movie is an incredible, that one's referred to as a neo-noir, but it's an incredible film. It is made by a very, very problematic filmmaker, and he has a top-tier noir film. He has a top-tier horror film in Rosemary's Baby, and I struggled with when I was doing my 31 Days of Horror that I'm like, I really want to watch Rosemary's Baby, but do I want to include that in my 31 Days of Horror? Are people going to be mad at me? And I'm like, this kind of sucks that I have to even, think about that, but he's a terrible human being. And so I certainly understand it.
Right.
It's an ongoing discussion that I don't think there's a lot of easy answers to, but I think the one thing I can definitively say is, depending on what your mileage is on problematic people, I thoroughly love this movie. I still love this movie, and I still think it's a fantastic film. I think it's a fantastic noir. Everyone's performances are fantastic. The score is wonderful. The style, the cinematography. I know I'm going to watch it again, and I highly recommend it to anybody who has any interest in just old Hollywood and noir and not so happy endings.
Yeah, and I do want to quickly note this article that you brought to my attention on Cinephilia and Beyond. It's
fantastic,
quite a lengthy article, so if you have some spare time, I'll have it in the show notes so you can all check it out. Tim and I, unfortunately, didn't get to it quite as much as we would have liked to beforehand. I probably got maybe a few paragraphs in, and I know you ended up getting home later than you had planned, so we're not going to discuss the article.
Yeah. You can't skim these articles. They're very in-depth.
Yeah.
Anybody who is a huge fan of film, I don't remember when I discovered this website. I actually think, I don't know if it was the One Perfect Shot or Film School Rejects. I feel like they're connected. I feel like they're
possibly
the same thing.
Both. Who knows?
But somewhere along the line, I got kind of turned on to this website, and it's cinephiliabeyond.org. If you Google cinephilia and beyond, it'll still come up. But if you're a fan of film and just deep dives into the production and the era of when some of these films came out, I feel like if anybody who's listening to this podcast, they are a fan of film in some fashion.
I would hope so.
I mean, there's fantastic articles about LA Confidential. There's Alien. They have a crap ton of Martin Scorsese stuff up there right now. I mean, you will lose yourself and all your productivity for days and weeks to come. So I sincerely apologize to your employers for turning you onto this website, but I hope you enjoy it.
And I think that's a good note to end this on. Before we go, though, I want to let you all know about our Patreon, where you can support the podcast for $1 a month or $5 a month if you would like to pick a topic for us to discuss on the show. I'll be sure to get through it as quickly as possible. If it's something longer like a TV show, if it's a movie or comic book, those are typically easier for me to get to. But if you do $5 a month, it's all up to you as long as we have not covered it before. And you can find us at Geekdom Pod on Twitter and at Welcome to Geekdom on Instagram and Facebook. As always, thank you all for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.